On behalf of Zimmick Group and of Xerox, welcome to the Designing Beyond CMYK for Xerox Iridesse webinar. My name is Erica Zimmet. I'll be your host for this session. I'm joined today by Nikki Kruger, who will be giving her design insights on creating for the Xerox Iridesse production press. We look forward to sharing many of the things that we have learned as our team has worked with Xerox and the Iridesse press over the past 3 years. Just to set some expectations before we get started, this session really is about design. We're going to be focusing on creative inspiration and design preparation in Creative Suite files. We're going to be looking at demystifying specialty design techniques and specific how-to steps for creating different techniques. And we're going to set the stage for additional consultative support that we can offer here at Zimmick Group if needed after this session. What this session will not do is troubleshoot specific files, look at downstream production or operator questions, or be an opportunity to troubleshoot specific technology issues. As we go forward throughout our time in the next couple of hours, what we're going to do is start by sharing our Iridesse story and talk a little bit about how we came to be involved with Iridesse and with Xerox in developing work for this press. We'll share a bit about the change in thinking that we went through when it comes to our design process and how we think about design for digital in this beyond CMYK space for Iridesse, and then look specifically at a snapshot of different design techniques that Iridesse opens up with its gold, silver, white, and clear specialty dry inks, and then get into Nikki taking us through those how-to steps in different Creative Suite files. So let's start with a little bit about our background. So Zimmick Group is an agency that is separate from Xerox. We are located in Rochester, New York, and we have had the privilege of working with Xerox on both Iridesse projects and other presses that Xerox develops that print beyond CMYK for the last 5 or so years. So that includes iGen, Color Press, and a new product called Adaptive CMYK Plus technology. So with all of that, we've developed a pretty deep experience in working with these various specialty toner type projects. Iridesse, however, was a really different project and product in how the press is actually constructed. It doesn't just have the opportunity to put one specialty ink down on the page, for example, in addition to CMYK, and that's where we really had to had the opportunity to start thinking very differently. So here's an example of what I mean by that, and this is where we can see that the way the press is architected is really a huge part of what opens up such cool new design opportunities. Right in the middle of the ink stations are the traditional CMYK inks that we're probably all very used to creating for. But what the press also has the opportunity for is this underlay station, which has the ability to run either silver, gold, or white inks. These can be swapped out really easily by the print provider. And then as well as an overlay station that can run silver, gold, white, or clear. Overlay meaning that these are going down on top of CMYK inks. So this opens up tons and tons of opportunities to think about blending inks in different ways or using them as just these specialty inks as just spot effects in different ways. And we're going to talk about all of this during this session. So a starting point for thinking about these opportunities can be seen here. So this takes just one graphic element, a butterfly, which we kind of like because it's analogous to that iridescent kind of effect that can be created with some of the metallic inks that Iridesse runs. But looking at just even using different media colors, so this example on the left, you could think about running a colored media like a red, using that underlay station to print a metallic like a gold, and then even just put a clear ink that kind of creates a really pretty design effect over the gold ink. And right there, even not using any CMYK, you can create some really stunning designs. Another opportunity could be using a dark media like a black, putting down a white ink underlay, and then running a CMYK color with a metallic overlay. Same art, but a very different look based on the kinds of inks that you're using. And yet another opportunity could be using a plain white media with a metallic silver underlay, and then blending that with CMYK to create some metallic color. So all of this can seem a little just almost endless possibilities, which is true. We will start you off with a few simple ways to think about this. The other factor with design and thinking about creating for Iridesse is the media. And I mentioned just a few possibilities on the previous slide in terms of color. But if you're not intimately familiar with the press, here are a few of the specifications to keep in mind for media in terms of weight, size, and media type. Probably the best thing to keep in mind is the fact that Xerox does continue to test and qualify lots and lots of different media by different paper vendors all the time. And they put out something called a tested substrate list, which they make available on Xerox.com. So we would definitely recommend that if you have any questions about a specific substrate from a specific vendor that you want to use, you can always check Xerox.com, search for Iridesse, tested substrate list, and see if it's on there, or check with your print provider. Okay, so in the time that we're going to spend on the rest of this session, we want to try and kind of corral the possibility of what Iridesse can do by looking at a few groupings of techniques. So some of the easiest ways to think about what's possible is by grouping them in these three buckets that we see here. So you can use any of the inks, gold, silver, white, or clear, to create spots or floods. This can be a really easy but tremendously effective way to add a lot of intrigue, interest, and value to lots and lots of different designs. So we'll talk about that and show you how to do that. Another really great way to up-level designs and add a lot of value is by using these inks to enhance photography. So Nikki will show you a couple of really cool techniques with silver, clear, and then white ink later on that enhance photos in different ways. And then we'll look at how you can mix inks to create both metallic colors and then bring in clear as well to kind of create a more complex but really some really beautiful designs. And again, all of these run on a wide variety of media. So before we get into these how-tos, we see a few examples here on screen of some of the jobs that we have created here. But we did want to provide just a little bit of another snapshot of some applications to kind of show you what's possible. So before we get into the how-tos, we'll just spend a few minutes talking about 4 or 5 jobs that we've done. So this one is kind of a fun mini catalog that we did that uses gold and clear. And Nikki, since I've been talking for a while, I'm going to let you describe a couple of the more interesting things that are going on here.
Sure. So you'll see on the right-hand page where we have the woman in the purple background and the disco ball, some bands that are appearing over there in the background. Those are created by applying clear and silhouetting out some of the things like the woman and the disco ball so that they just appear in the background there. It gives it a nice shine and texture to that image. On the right-hand side, there's a gold fill that is applied as an underlay there. And then you'll see the gold also in the coupon text. And in the cover and the back cover images that we have below, with the cover there is a gold underlay, and those bands of color are multiplied over to kind of create this mixed metallic hue. The shapes that you see kind of in the top left corner there, those are filled with gold, and that gives it like a nice contrast between the solid gold fill and the iridescent mixed metallics there. And same with the image on the back cover that we see of the woman. She's being multiplied over a tint of gold, and that's giving that this kind of mixed metallic effect.
Very cool. So lots of different techniques being used on this one piece. And I think we're going to talk about all of those techniques as we get into our how-tos. So that's a great kind of peek ahead at what's coming. So looking at this next job, this is a postcard series that we did. Little bit of a different look here. So Nikki, can you tell us what's going on here?
Sure. The biggest difference between some of the techniques used here and then on the previous screen we just saw is that we're using silver as an underlay and clear as an overlay. So here with the silver, we have some mixed metallic things happening where we're multiplying some CMYK shapes over the silver, some where we're not multiplying the CMYK, so it's true CMYK, which kind of gives that some dimension against the silver inks. And then also clear. So you'll see on that, the autumn postcard there, some of the shapes in the upper left corner there, that's actually clear being multiplied over the silver mixed metallic shapes, which is kind of giving it like a dull appearance. So that helps create like different depths within a design.
Now, is that also how this text is being created? Is this clear as well?
That is correct.
Very cool. All right, really neat. Okay, so let's look at this. Very different design, but I think I see a bunch of metallic and maybe some white on these. Can you tell us what's going on here?
Sure. The one that's being used in the background, that uses white and silver inks there, as well as CMYK. So the white shapes and numbers that you'll see, as long as the text and then the underlay to the text of the headers and then the lines that you see in between the menu items. There's white under there to allow that tint of the blue to kind of print over on that black media that we're printing on.
Very cool. So this is a really great point to make for everyone that's listening. Because of the way the press is architected and because all of these colors go down on the page at the same time, you get really, really, really great registration from color to color. So it's not like some other technologies where the paper is running through multiple times, or you might have to manually pass it through the press multiple times. If you've got the 6-color configuration and you're able to really make use of that underlay station, you can really nail the registration on some very, very fine details. So these rules, I seem to remember it might have been 1-point rules. Keep me honest there, Nikki.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, I think so. And that is a pretty cool thing to be able to do, to register, you know, a tint of a cyan over over a white rule. So a pretty neat thing to keep in mind with the registration on the press. Awesome. How about this one? So this one looks like it's using white as well, but it looks like it's also in a window. What's happening with this one?
Yes, so for this one, we are using a window cling media, and then we've printed white as an underlay to kind of create that shape, and then CMYK and gold as an overlay. And that allows the gold and the CMYK to kind of sit on top, but then you're not going to see the window through that. That is more opaque.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, and then last in our little series of inspiration application samples, this is, I'd say, one of our favorites, although we like everything that we've just shown. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here, Nikki, with this folding carton.
So this folding carton, we did a flood of silver as an underlay, and then we have an overlay of clear that is creating those tire tracks there. And it dulls the finish of the silver, so it adds like this nice dimension to it. And we have the Zephyr logo there kind of knocking out of the clear, so that's kind of why you don't see that like texture going across the logo there. So that, again, adds like a nice layer to the design.
Very cool. So my guess is because you're just creating this all with ink, you know, this can help people get away from using like a really, really expensive like metallic sheet to create this kind of effect, which is, you know, a cool thing to keep in mind.
That's correct.
Beautiful. Okay, so now we're going to transition into some of the best practices and conventions that we have come up with as we have gained some experience with Iridesse over these past few years. One of the first is that we have really determined that thinking in layers is very, very helpful. What we try and do is match out the build of our designs and the way we even think about the inks that we're going to use to the structure of the press itself. So as we're thinking about an underlay or as we're thinking about an overlay and how that's going to transition into an Illustrator file or an InDesign file, we really think about, you know, kind of creating that art in the same way that the press is built, so that we actually create an underlay layer that is designated for whatever the underlay color might be, whether it's gold, silver, or white, a CMYK layer that is for whatever CMYK art elements are going to exist, if there will be any, and then an overlay layer for that specific overlay color. Establishing and maintaining really good communication with our print provider is key. Knowing what inks they have available and what inks are in the press is really, really important. So that is another thing, especially for those of you that may be working with folks outside. That is something that we would obviously encourage as something that you do just as a rule and as a best practice. So we just looked at a bunch of different jobs that use different inks in a lot of different ways. But another thing that can be helpful when you're getting started with design for Iridesse is looking at one piece of art that can be modified and up-leveled using the different inks to kind of see how it can evolve and build as you add a fifth color and then a sixth color. So Nikki, let's kind of talk through this business card job and sort of take people through what we've done from 4 colors to 5 colors to 6 colors.
Sure. So here you see the example where we've created a 4-color business card. We have the image in the background there, and then we have a flood of a CMYK blended color on the back.
Okay, so now when we go to 5-color, what happened here?
So this version here, we added this cool triangle pattern and created that as like a clear watermark element over the design. So we have that multiplying on top of the CMYK that you see there on the front and then also on the back.
Okay, very cool. So that's just an overlay, but you're able to create some pretty cool patterns. I bet that catches in the light, really neat. And then what happens when we go to 6 colors? This looks pretty different.
This is really different. So what we did here to achieve this iridescent mixed metallic effect is the press creates these mixed metallic colors using CMYK blended with an underlay of gold or silver. Here we're using a tint of silver to do that. And the best way to do that is to use imagery that is open in highlights and midtones that allows more of the silver to come through the CMYK. So you'll see the image on the left is really dark and vibrant, very bold colors. So what we did was we opened up that image in Photoshop and adjusted the highlights and the midtones significantly. So you still get that like watercolor effect of that art, but it's much lighter. And then we brought that into InDesign and multiplied that over a tint of the silver. And then you'll also notice it's got this kind of like swirl pattern going on over that. And so we switched the patterns here. That's a little bit different, but that kind of swirl pattern that you see happening, that is actually clear overprinting on top of CMYK and the silver. And then you'll notice on the background there, it's this kind of mixed metallic color. So what we did was we took a tint of the color being used previously. I think it was something like maybe 30% and multiplied it over the silver. And then those kind of circle shapes that you see in the background there, that is also clear. That is being overprinted on top of that and multiplied. So that is giving that kind of like dull versus metallic effect that you see happening.
Very cool. All right, so you just touched on a few things that we're going to reinforce a few times as we get into the how-to steps, but I want to do just a little reinforcement here because there's a kind of a really important point that you made about creating metallic color effects or metallic effects beyond just using silver or gold as a spot color. And that is the need to use something that is lighter or more open when you're multiplying it over a metallic base. And that is really, really important. We kind of learned that lesson the hard way, if I remember right. And I seem to remember trying to take some moody images and making them, you know, metallic, and it just didn't work because when you try and put a dark, dense, you know, really, really heavy coverage CMYK image or spot color over metallic, it just does not let that metallic color come through. It does not metallicize that image or that spot color effectively. So that's kind of a huge thing that we've learned as we've tested and as we've been involved with Iridesse is you have to go more to this sort of lighter, almost pastelish, open type of palette to create really those iridescent hues.
That's correct.
Beautiful. All right, so good tip to pass on for those of you listening. Okay, so let's talk about creating and naming spot colors. There is one rule on this screen, and then the rest of it is convention. So the press is going to be looking for a color that has been spec'd as a spot color and named in a certain way. So that's the rule. spot color named gold, capital G, spot color named silver, capital S, spot color named white, capital W, spot color named clear, capital C. The conventions that we have come to are what those colors look like on the screen. That is where the press doesn't care. So how you choose to mix your gold, your silver, your white, and your clear is quite honestly up to you. Feel free to use our conventions, but what we would strongly recommend is that you do adopt a convention and stick with it, because consistency is helpful both for you and your team and also for your clients. As you'll see when we start looking at the PDFs that are created of these jobs, they look a little strange. They're not kind of nice, clean looking PDFs that we might all be used to proofing on screen for 4-color jobs. So having some conventions that your clients can rely on and understand, as far as, oh, that cyan shape, I understand, is a white thing or will be a white thing when it's printed, or that magenta shape, I understand, will be where the clear ink goes, is really, really helpful. Okay, and then we spoke a bit about the notion of layering and kind of bringing that concept of how the press is constructed with an underlay station, CMYK, and an overlay station forward into the way that we build and create our files. This is just an example of what that looks like in InDesign, looking at the layers palette. Again, this is a convention that we use. It helps us keep ourselves organized, both in our design thinking and then just in the organization of the elements, so we can make sure that all of the things that we had intended in this example to be clear are kind of grouped together and have been made clear as intended. We have found that this is a really, really helpful way to ensure that we're building clean files that are ready for, good, clean production. So again, a convention that we wanted to share with you that we hope is helpful as you go forward. Okay, so now we are ready to get into some of the fun stuff here. We are going to look at our first example file. So as we mentioned a little while ago, we're grouping our examples by kind of easier to do into, building into a little more complex. We're going to start with just a spot overlay example. This is absolutely the easiest way to add impact with specialty dry inks. And you can do this with any one of the specialty dry inks, clear, white, gold, or silver. Again, making sure you've got good communication with your print provider and that you know which inks you have loaded. The example we're going to look at is this job here. This is a photograph of the print. As you can see, this uses silver to create this really flashy, eye-catching W. And we also applied it to a logo that you'll see in the file. So very simple to do, but really eye-catching when you see this print being manipulated in the light. So let's start by looking at the PDF. So this one is pretty easy to understand because just with the silver spots, it's easy to see where those effects are going to be. Again, it's on the W and on this mod eyewear logo down in the lower right. The way we export our PDFs, which we will show you, does export layers out. So you can see that since we are building in layers, we also get those layers pulling through to the PDF, which is really helpful for the press operator to have access to that information as well. So we've got our silver overlay and our CMYK content separated out. And you can also see, if you look in your separations in in Acrobat that there's silver here is resident and it's just used at 100%. So again, very easy implementation of a spot effect. Now I'm going to turn this over to Nikki so she can show us how this is done. And I think after she goes through the silver, she's going to also show us how you can kind of do the same sort of thing using clear, so you can get a couple of implementations from one example. Take it away, Nikki.
Thank you. Like Erica said, here we have this direct mail example, and this version here is CMYK, and we're going to show you how to apply spot silver to that. First, we're going to start by adding the silver swatch to our swatches palette. So we'll go over here to our swatches palette and go down to new color swatch. We'll select the color mode and go down to Pantone solid coated. In here, we're going to type in 877. That is the silver ink that we use as our base here. We'll add it to our swatches palette, double click it, and rename that. So we'll go ahead and switch this to CMYK and then rename it. So we can rename it to silver with a capital S and click OK. And we'll see that appear correctly over here in our swatches palette. The next thing we'll do is we'll copy the elements. We'll go ahead and copy these elements here that we're going to want to be silver onto the silver layer. Go to the layers palette over here, click new layer, make this silver with a capital S to match our naming convention. Notice that it appears above the CMYK layer here. Now that we're on that layer, we'll go ahead and paste in place our elements. Go back over to our swatches palette, and we'll highlight the W and the logo here and make those silver. There's no need to multiply those objects since we don't want the CMYK below the objects to come through, so we'll leave those as normal. Then we'll go through our PDF settings here. Actually, first, I'll go ahead and just turn the layers on and off so you can see. So we'll have the elements on our CMYK layer, elements on our silver layer, and then together. So to export your PDF, you go to PDF and start with, you could start with press quality. We're going to just go ahead and start with our Xerox preset here, rename the file silver. So here you want to switch your compatibility to the Acrobat 7. You also want to make sure that create Acrobat layers is checked on and that export layers is set to visible and printable layers. Under compression, you want to make sure that everything is set to do not downsample. You'll see that under all three of these here. Under marks and bleeds, depending on the job, you can adjust these settings to however you'd like. Under output, for color, color conversion, make sure that it is set to no color conversion. And then under profile inclusion policy, be sure that it's set to include all RGB and tagged source CMYK profiles. Next, under advanced, you just want to make sure that under this subset, when % of characters used is less than 100, make sure that says 100% in there. And that's it. Then you go ahead and export your PDF.
Beautiful. And just a side note, all those PDF steps that Nikki just went through are also documented in a design guide that we helped to create with Xerox for Iridesse, and we will provide a URL where that can be downloaded later. So if you didn't catch all of that, no worries. You can download the design guide later, and all those steps are noted.
Perfect. So next, we're just going to revert to our image here again, and then I'm going to go through the steps and show you how to add clear. So last time we started with our swatches palette, we're going to start there again and add our spot color. So if you go to new swatch, and then for clear, we use 100% magenta as our color here. We'll switch this from process to spot, and then we'll go ahead and name our swatch up here with capital C, clear. And we'll go ahead and say OK and add that to our swatches palette. We'll go ahead and copy our elements that we want to have clear to a new layer, which we'll go over here, add our new layer, name that clear, just like we did the silver, keeping the names the same. That just helps everything stay organized. And then while we're on this layer, we'll go ahead and paste in place. Over on the swatches, we'll switch it from the black to the clear. The one thing to note here, though, is to get that clear to appear correctly, we need to go to Effects and switch the setting here on the blending mode from normal to multiply.
So Nikki, what would happen if you did not multiply? Would you just get a big magenta W?
You sure would.
Oh, okay. Well, so while that might look cool against that cyan background, that probably isn't what you're after. So note to self for everybody on the call that when you're running clear, you always want to multiply.
Correct. And this effect does have a slightly different appearance. While it's only appearing on the CMYK, it's not appearing over any spot metallic colors. So the W here, in fact, and the logo below will appear glossy, not as like a dull varnish.
Good note. All right, very cool. So that was great. So that is with one piece of art, a couple of ways to think about applying a spot effect with two different colors. That W, you could do exactly the same thing that Nikki did with the silver with gold ink. Same exact steps as what she did with the silver with the gold, just the only difference is naming it gold capital G. You know, you've got an easy way to bring some really cool metallic or clear effects to your page with just a couple of simple steps.
Perfect. I will share this back with you, Erica.
Excellent. All right, so with that in mind, let's look at kind of building on that a little bit and looking at now that we've created a spot effect, how we can build on that with like larger areas on the page. So same exact concept as with a spot, but you can now extend that to bigger areas of the page to create floods. So we saw that Zephyr box earlier, the exact same steps that Nikki just went through to create that silver W. You would do the same steps to create just a big flood of silver or gold on the page to create a big area of metallic if you wanted to do that. You can also do the same concept that she showed you with the clear W to create a flood overlay of clear, which can be really, really useful for highlighting photographic imagery or just creating really cool design effects. And then as Nikki mentioned, you definitely have to make sure that you are multiplying any of those clear objects anytime you use them in order to get clear to print correctly. So let's move on to our next example. This is just doing a little build on top of what we just did to look at using both a metallic underlay and a clear overlay. So we've talked about this Zephyr folding carton before, but we wanted to revisit it and just kind of talk philosophically about something that's going on here because it's going to pull through to this next example that we talk about. So not only does the clear over metallic give this really cool kind of dull varnish type of an effect, that concept of creating visual difference and not just kind of blasting everything with shiny metallic is a really, really important one to keep in mind when you think about the array of specialty inks that are available with Iridesse and the ability to create some really dynamic and visually interesting designs. So what we found is using, whether it is the contrast of clear and metallic or paper contrasted with some of these inks, but creating some visual differences and leaving room for the eye to bounce off different shiny and non-shiny areas really adds some drama and a lot of intrigue to designs. So that's something to really keep in mind as you think about creating for Iridesse. Another way to do that and build some dimension and intrigue and visual interest into your designs is by not always using 100% of the specialty ink. You can vary the percentages that are used, whether that's clear or your metallics, and that gives you different effects. It can help focus interest in different ways, or just, again, create kind of a different sense of dimension or depth to your design. Clear can also create some very cool just watermark effects when used directly on the paper itself. So it does not have to just be limited to use on top of a metallic or on top of CMYK. It can just be a very, very cool design effect when used directly on a white media or a colored media. So moving into our next example, this gets into that photo enhancement realm. And here we're going to combine a couple of things. This job mixes a silver underlay, which is sitting under a photographic image to create kind of a cool metallic enhancement with the photograph, and then a clear overlay on top of other areas of the image. So looking at the PDF, we can start to see where both of those things are happening. And this is also a good illustration of what I said earlier about the PDFs kind of looking a little strange in some cases. So the black and white areas of this photo are actually multiplied over a silver background. So you can see that those areas of the photo get a little muddy looking in the PDF. They print beautifully, but on screen in the PDF, they look a little dark. With the magenta areas, you can see where the clear is going to come down on top of these yellow cabs. Again, in the layers in the PDF, you can see that we have a clear overlay, CMYK, and then a silver underlay. And you can see where those spot plates come through. The percentages are just based on where the cursor was when the screenshot was taken. So Nikki, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to you so that you can show folks how this file is layered together and organized.
Sure. So here we're looking at the straight CMYK original photo, just so we could talk about that for a second. You'll see that this photo has a lot of contrast between the highlights, midtones, and shadows. There's a lot of highlights and midtones within the sky, and then the building, and then a little bit down here kind of in the street with the lines in the road. So those elements being brighter, not so dark, that's what's going to lend itself to like letting that silver ink come through underneath there. So we're going to switch over to our silver and clear files so we can show you how we did that. So this layer here, we'll start with the base layer is silver. So we created these selections in Photoshop. Here we removed the shapes of the cab and the clock that you'll see happening here so that the CMYK can print on top of that and not have that come through on those elements of that image. We have two images of CMYK that are going to appear over this silver layer here. So what's happening is on our CMYK layer, we have this kind of city background file up here that has the cabs and the clock removed from it as well. And then this image is set under the effects to multiply. So that is what is allowing that silver to kind of come through there, kind of see the difference right here. Then on top of that, also on our CMYK layer is another Photoshop file here. And this one is just the cabs and the clock. So you'll see if I turn off these other two layers, we just have those graphic elements in that image right there. And those are not set to multiply.
So you actually separated, even though both of those are CMYK, you separated those out because they're doing essentially two different things, and that's okay.
Correct.
Okay, cool. So that's kind of a complexity thing that's probably good for people to keep in mind, and just a good way to look at how this file is built as folks think about creating different types of art.
Exactly. And by not setting those cabs and the clock to multiply, you're getting true CMYK. So you get that vivid yellow color, and that's really going to pop against the silver that we're using here kind of in this background image.
Very cool.
Then we also took a selection of clear that is just the shape of the cabs and the clock. So we have that saved out as its own Photoshop file also. That's in our top layer here. That also is set to multiply. And that is what is going to give that kind of gloss finish to our cabs and our clock. And that's going to add like another dimension to the image as well.
Very cool.
So that's how we put that together. Yeah. So I will go ahead and share it back with you now, Erica.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. So moving on, we're going to build a little bit further on what we just talked about. So we just spoke about a silver underlay and a clear overlay to enhance photographic images. Now we're going to talk about using a silver underlay and a clear overlay, but in this case, it's going to be working with custom illustration and creating custom metallic colors or metallic hues. So kind of the same press setup with a metallic underlay and a clear overlay, again, keeping that good convention in mind of knowing what inks are loaded at the press and good communication with the print provider. But in this case, we're creating a very, very different piece of art. So no photographic imagery here. The CMYK that's happening in this job is all vector-based. And in this case, this art was created in Illustrator and was a combination of CMYK, spot silver, and then, as I mentioned, some custom metallic colors using gradients, and then with a clear overlay. So kind of a complex looking file, but it really uses all the same techniques that we've been talking about, just kind of bringing them together in a bit of an Uber example, if you will. So here's a glimpse at the PDF. Again, you see where the clear is by looking at the magenta elements, and you could kind of probably start by this point picking out where the silver is. You can see the silver plate and the clear plate in the PDF. And I'm going to hand it back over to Nikki so she can show us kind of a comparison between what the original CMYK artwork was and where we ended up with that final specialty prepped file.
Sure. As you'll see here over on the left-hand side, we have the CMYK version of our polar bear. We have like a blue sky happening here, some dark blue elements in the snowflakes and the wave graphics that we have here. So just like with the cab example, we try to take a CMYK only image or vector piece of art and think about how we could enhance that. So here we thought about removing the light blue sky, and then we could incorporate some silver behind this mesh gradient that you see back here is the water to give it that iridescent mixed metallic color. And then these darker elements that you see on the right, or the left-hand side here for the snowflakes and the waves, we decided to change those over to be clear. And in the printed example, you'll see that those kind of leave this like dull varnish over the mixed metallic that's really pretty. We also decided to leave some of these darker shapes that you see here. Those aren't going to perform well with the silver underneath because it doesn't let the silver really come through. So we left those as CMYK only as contrast also against some of the silver shapes that you see here and some of these gradients. Some of the gradients are left as CMYK, but some also are multiplying over some silver shapes to kind of give it that mixed metallic look. So that adds another layer of dimension to the polar bear. So we're going to go ahead and just go through this Illustrator file. We'll go through all the layers so you can kind of see how everything is built. In this particular file, we ended up using a few layers here. It doesn't necessarily have to be just one silver layer, one CMYK layer. In this particular instance, we broke it apart just to keep things organized the way some of the CMYK is multiplying over the silver and some of the CMYK is not. It just made our file actually a little less complex to keep the layers broken apart like this. We'll start with our silver base here. So we have a flood here that's, let's see, that is 75% silver that we're using here as this base. Then we have our first CMYK layer. In this layer, we have the mesh gradient multiplying, and then these objects, these CMYK objects that you see, the little triangles that make up the polar bear, they are not multiplying. They are staying 100% CMYK. So that is not going to allow the silver to come through on those shapes that you see there. On our second layer of silver here, that kind of adds some other dimension was the different tints of silver that we're using for the polar bear. You'll see there's different shades here. This one is 100%, 75, 50. So changing up the percentage of the spot color also adds some dimension to this piece as well. We'll turn on our second CMYK layer here, and you kind of see some of those silver shapes there kind of fill in. Those have additional gradients, CMYK gradients, that happen to be multiplying over, and that is what is allowing some of that silver to kind of come through there to create that mixed metallic effect. And then finally, we have our clear layer. We have the snowflakes and then these wave graphics here. Those are also set to multiply, and that is what kind of gives it that dull varnish in the end with the finished print.
Very cool. All right. Beautiful. So that is definitely a very custom, very artistic view of metallic color. If you can pass the ball back my way, what we'll do is look at a way that we have come up with, along with Xerox, to simplify the application of metallic color a bit. So the example that Nikki just took us through is absolutely something where you would need to create those custom metallic colors exactly as she showed you, because you're really creating an overall effect with lots and lots of different elements that kind of build together to create an overall impression. However, there are many jobs where you just may want to use a metallic color that is not just silver, not just gold, but an actual metallic hue for a logo or a a call-out box or something like that. And you don't necessarily have the time or want to go through the process of kind of doing that as a custom color and guessing what it's going to look like. So in that case, Xerox has developed a swatch set of metallic hues that really help take the guesswork out of what mixes with what to create these metallic colors. And it's really pretty cool. So the way that this works is there are a palette of a couple hundred metallic colors. One palette is silver-based and one palette is gold-based. We're looking here at the gold-based colors. And these are created with combinations of 60% of the metallic color as a base, and then different tints, basically 20% tints of different CMY combinations. These are all built in InDesign swatches, and the swatches are compatible only with InDesign, so that's something to keep in mind. So print providers should have access to both a set of PDFs of swatches that can be printed, so you can see what these colors look like on different media that you might be thinking of running. And then the swatches can be loaded in InDesign, which kind of automates the process of specifying the color that you like based on looking at that printed swatch page. So based on the color that you select, it's built right into your file. You don't have to worry about doing what Nikki just showed you in terms of kind of multiplying a CMYK layer with a metallic underlay layer. You would just select the color that you like, apply it to your art, and off you go with creating your PDF and sending it to the press. So for art like this, where it really is a spot application, it really does simplify the process quite a bit. So I'm going to hand this back to Nikki so she can show us kind of the process of loading those swatches in InDesign, and then applying the colors to that art. Take it away, Nikki.
All right, thanks. So loading the swatches is super easy. Once you go up to your swatch palette over here, you click on the drop down, go to load swatches. You would select the InDesign file that your print provider would provide you with, and then just click open, and you'll see your swatch palette is populated with all of these wonderful mixed metallic swatches, and it is that easy. You would just come over, select your art, select the color. It's easy enough to just change. It's easy if you need a lot of mixed metallic colors happening in a job, then you wouldn't necessarily have to create all these different tints. You could go ahead, I need a green mixed metallic. I need a rose gold mixed metallic. It's that simple to just go over to your swatches palette and select the swatch. And you'll see there's lots to choose from over here.
All right, very cool. So as a side note for anyone who may be listening and saying, where do I get those swatches? We believe that those are made available through the Xerox analysts to Iridesse print provider customers. So if you own an Iridesse press, check with your sales rep or your analyst, and you should be able to get your hands on both the PDFs and the InDesign swatch source files. And then those InDesign swatch source files can be shared with your designer customers to automate that swatch selection process. Okay, so let's move on here. Nikki, if you can pass back to me. Now we're going to switch gears kind of out of the metallic realm, and we are going to start getting into things that we can do with white ink. So as a reminder, white can be used as an underlay or as an overlay in the press. Regardless of where you put it, it can run as a single hit, so whether it's in the underlay station or the overlay station. If you do have it in both stations, it can be run as a double hit. And as a designer, this is pretty cool because what that does is it lets you kind of double up the opacity of the white ink without doing anything special to your file. So you would prepare your file in exactly the same way, just do your layout as you normally would, specify your spot color, and then just merely ask your print provider to run it with a double hit of ink. So it doesn't mean that you have to build in a second layer of white, for example. So that's kind of a nice advantage there. And then with white, just like we looked at with metallics, white can be used to create a flood of an area. So thinking back to our window cleaning example that Nikki described earlier, you know, especially when you're using a transparent media, you could create a flood underlay so that CMYK and or metallic artwork sits on that really nicely, and you can create some really nice window graphics on that media. You can also use white to create floods that sit under CMYK imagery on different colored or specialty papers. This example that we're looking at here on the right of this, the photograph of this woman, is one that we did fairly early on in our exploration of white, and she printed beautifully, which was really, really cool to see. This is a very, very, very smooth, almost a mirror finish silver stock. So the finish of the media is something that you need to keep in mind when you're using white as an underlay under CMYK. As you get into media that has a rougher texture and uncoated stocks, if you're using white under CMYK photographs, there can at times be kind of a mottled appearance with some of those stocks. So it's worth just testing that to make sure that the results are what you're intending. Okay, so we're going to look at a job that blends a couple of things, a photo enhancement with white and also a spot use of white ink. And this job actually only uses white ink. It ran on a beautiful black specialty media. So this was one piece where we really, really wanted to showcase the media and use the white ink to really feature this beautiful specialty stock that we had access to. So looking at the PDF, we are now remembering that in our world, white ink looks cyan when we prep our files. So everywhere on screen where we see cyan, that is where the white ink is going to print. And looking at our separations here, I think, we probably had the cursor right about here. So, not over here where it was 100% white. So that's why it's only reading 12%. Just depends on where that reading was taken. But this whole file was created just with white ink, nothing else, no CMYK. But very, very effective way, again, with some colored or specialty media to create a really, some really eye-catching effects. So I'm going to turn it back over to Nikki so she can show you how the image prep was done on the photograph and then what was done in InDesign to bring it all together.
Thanks, Erica.
You got it.
Okay. So first thing we will do is we'll start by converting our grayscale image here to the white that we're going to be seeing. Go over to our links and then open it up there in Photoshop. So the first thing we need to do is we'll go to Image, Mode, and then switch it from grayscale to duotone. Oh, it must have been gold that I used last. We'll double click on this swatch here. And as said previously in the presentation, we use 100% cyan as our color that we specify for our spot white. You'll see that pops up here. You'll see the image kind of changing here. We'll rename that cyan to white. We'll go up to adjustments, invert the image, because we want to see what you see appearing white here is actually going to be that print media coming through. So that'll be the black paper. And what you see as cyan is going to print as that white ink. So we'll just go ahead and do a save as. I'm going to call this one white. And save it. So I'll switch back over to our InDesign file here. And then relink to the white file that we just created. So we'll relink that, select our white file, and you'll see that appear. And you'll see that the white spot color has appeared over here in our swatches palette. We'll go over to our layer. It's not as big of a deal in this file since everything is going to be printing white, but I just like to keep things organized. So I'll rename my layer to white. Then we'll go in and select our other elements that we would like to print in white as well. So even though this is appearing as white right now, it would not print as white. So we want to go ahead, select our text, make that the white. I have a couple other graphic elements over here. Make that the white ink also, and our logo below, switch that to white. And it's that easy. Then you go ahead and export your PDF, and then you'd be able to print that on a variety of dark media and get a great result.
Very, very cool. All right. You want to pass it back my way? I think we're getting close to wrapping up here. All right, so just a quick view here of that window cling that we looked at. And full disclaimer, this is a bit of a lift out of the design guide that we mentioned a little while back. So if you're wondering what on earth page 14 refers to, that's what that's from. But this does let you see just another view of how kind of that white underlay can work for a different kind of a file, and also a reminder of some of the content that is available in that design guide. It does go step by step through many of the types of things that Nikki has taken you through today. So well worth a download, especially having had this session experience to kind of bring some of these concepts to life. It'll make for a great resource and reference to just flip through and really easily access some quick reminders on spots, metallic colors, et cetera, et cetera. So before we wrap up, we just wanted to share a couple of other insights. So we did spend some time talking about, thinking about like metallicizing images, and Nikki shared some really great pointers about, that city image where it had a lot of highlights and open midtones and areas that were really going to let that metallic ink shine through. One of the other things that we have found in our testing and our exploration is something that we at least have just learned to stay away from. And that is there's a wealth of images out there that have already been optimized and prepped to look really, really good, printing in CMYK that already look metallic. So this woman that we're looking at on screen here is a great example. She's a stock photo. She's already been through some kind of wonderful pre-press process. Somebody painted her, I guess, with metallic gold paint, but she looks very gold already. If we were to put her, kind of multiply her over an underlay of gold ink, the only thing that we would really succeed in doing is plugging up a lot of her highlights and kind of dulling her down. Nikki, am I explaining that right? Is that kind of been your experience with these types of images?
That's correct, yes. I think she would really look kind of muddy with the gold multiplying underneath her. One way that you could maybe add to this photo would be have like gold text next to it, or maybe a couple other gold elements that weren't on her that were on that black background.
That's a great way to think about it. So we've been pulled into a couple of client jobs that use images like this, and that's exactly what we did, was find other ways to integrate and utilize the metallic inks so that they really are being showcased to their best advantage, and so that the imagery that has already been really optimized and shot so beautifully can just do what it's already doing. Now, if someone wanted to spend the time to get back into this image and probably create some sort of specialty channel or pull other things out in a very custom way and figure out how to insert a new gold channel, I'm fully sure that that could be done, but we do not have some special, quick and easy way to do that in kind of an automated fashion that makes that work on any metallic image, unfortunately. So that's something that we did want to share, because we've definitely bumped up against this a few times, and we've had a bunch of people ask us, oh, how do I make the watch look more silver? How do I make the ring look more gold? And we just really haven't found a great way of doing it. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. And then just another friendly reminder about the metallic swatches. They really do simplify the process of specifying metallic colors, not only for yourselves as designers, but also working through that process with your clients. These metallic colors are nothing that you can soft proof on screen. So having these pre-printed swatches and having then the ability to really quickly say, oh, I want G86 or whatever the number is, and dial that right into your InDesign file, just saves so much time, and it gets you back into that thought process that we all and our clients are pretty comfortable with, kind of in that Pantone realm of picking a color and just knowing that that's what it's going to be. So that takes a lot of that guesswork out of it, and it kind of lets you take a simple step into metallic color and really demystify what's happening, which is really, really valuable. So a few last things here before we wrap up. We have said this a bunch of times, but it is worth making the point again as we wrap up. Good working partnerships between design and production are just so important with these jobs. While we have been sharing a lot of our insights and best practices, building in time to collaborate with your print provider and proof jobs to make sure that what you're seeing in your head is what's going to come out on press is really, really important, especially if you're looking to test something new. So be sure that you're building in that time and that you're having those conversations across the board and setting expectations correctly. Another thing to be aware of, if you aren't already, is that there are things that can be done to add specialty effects at the press without having to kind of go back upstream into design files. So this is pretty cool and really, really good to know. It can be a big time saver if you're looking to up-level jobs that have already been completed. Then you don't have to kind of crack back into your InDesign source files or your Illustrator source files. You could just, you know, kind of reopen the PDF or work with your operator to do some of these techniques, especially if you're just looking to do something fairly simple. One really fun effect is that the press is able to add multiple layers of clear to create dimensional effects. It can do that with up to 7 passes. So if you created, for example, a little series of clear dots, imagine that you've created a little pattern over this guy that kind of roughly mimics where all of his scales are. The operator can then tell the press to multipass clear, and it'll put 7 layers down, and it creates a really cool textural pattern that just adds a lot of sensory effects to your print. So that's a really neat thing that can be done, and it doesn't mean that you have to put 7 layers of clear in your file, which is good to know. A few other things that can be done at the press. It can just simply create a single or double hit of silver, gold, or white. So if your file has already been set up with those spot colors and both of those colors are loaded in the underlay and overlay station at the press, the operator can specify that those colors be printed as a single or a double hit, again, kind of amplifying the intensity of those colors. If you have a spot color specified in your file, but you want to change that spot color, say it's a Pantone color, and you just want to say, oh, everywhere where it's called out as Pantone 185, I want that to print silver. They can do that right at the press for you. You don't have to go back into your file. Similarly, there are some adjustments that can be made right at the press to color all text, all graphics, or all images with a specialty ink, to add clear overlay over specific elements in the file, or to add white underlay under certain areas of the file. So these are fairly straightforward additions. They would not allow for the kind of more complex implementation like in that CAB document that Nikki took us through. But if you have a fairly straightforward document with, you know, just square photos and you want to add some clear overlays over them, you may be able to do that with these types of on-press adjustments without having to go back upstream. Getting close to wrapping up here, we Zimit Group are available for additional consulting beyond this session if you find that that is needed and that you would like additional help. The way that that happens is that we are engaged through the Xerox Business Development Consulting Services team. Your sales representative can initiate that conversation. It starts with a simple discovery call in which we can talk about, what your objectives are and what you're looking for. Engagements can range anywhere from helping you identify good jobs to apply specialty effects to. Say there's a suite of 4-color jobs you're already running and you're looking to see where it might make sense to add gold, silver, white, or clear. You might need help implementing some of the techniques that we talked about on this session today into Creative Suite. You might be looking to design an open house, create elements that would support an open house. We can help with that. You might be looking to create sample jobs that would support your sales force as they look to sell digital specialty capabilities out. Or you may just be looking for somebody to help you design jobs. We're available to do that as well. So again, feel free to initiate further conversations through your sales rep as needed. Finally, we did mention that some supporting resources are available that do kind of reinforce everything that we've talked about today. There are a few how-to videos that go through a couple of different design jobs, and then more kind of continue to be released in this series, including some of the ones that Nikki went through today. So you can check out this URL for those how-to videos. And then the design and file prep guide that we mentioned is available at xerox.com/Iridesse as a PDF download. And that is a really helpful resource that we would highly, highly suggest downloading and just having available as an at-hand reference. So with that, I think we have covered everything, and we thank you for your time and wish you much good luck as you move forward in preparing files for Iridesse, and look forward to seeing lots of successes in the future. Thank you so much.